Hey guys, you're listening to the Be Bold, Be Birmingham podcast. We're here to dance to the beat of Brum's drum. We're here to sing the soul of our city. Birmingham 2022 is just around the corner, and we're here to tell you about the amazing city Birmingham that we live in. I am your host, Melzy J, and I have Ben here. How are you, Ben?
I'm doing good. How are you, Melzy? Feeling good?
I'm liking the little raindrop hair there.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. I've applied a small amount of product in it, and I'm happy with how it's working.
Small amount. We have an amazing guest here in the studio, Sara Wajid. She is the joint CEO of Birmingham Museums, a collection of 8 sites across Birmingham and the surrounding areas. She's also a founder member of Space Invaders and founder of Museum Detox. Now, there's many museums that you actually support. But first, how are you today?
I'm brilliant, thank you very much. It's a bit soggy out there, but it's lovely and bright in here.
So give me a little bit of a breakdown of what your role is at the Birmingham Museum.
Well, I was thinking about this on the way over, how to describe what you do as a CEO or a co-CEO of a big trust like Birmingham Museums Trust. And basically, I think the best way to describe it is that being a museum director, I think might, for some people, summon up the image of something quite lofty, quite sort of high status, wafting around, maybe saying important things about artworks and pointing at things and saying, move that, buy this, and that sort of thing. And actually, when I was first in the industry, from a distance, that's what quite a lot of the big important museum directors looked like to me, because I mainly saw museum directors of national museums. And then as I kind of went on in the industry, I met more and more museum directors from around the country and started realising that what I'd seen was a sort of slightly Hollywood version of museum directors. And actually, most museum directors are more like something like a cross between a head teacher and editor of a good local newspaper. And maybe throw into that a little bit of also a kind of cultural leader, a cultural activist a little bit, and also a medium-sized business owner. So if you put those sorts of things together, that's probably the closest approximation of most museum directors in this country. And in there is also, is also kind of artistic director, because there is an artistic vision. So ultimately, Zach and I are responsible for setting the vision of how the museum service should best serve the people of Birmingham and the West Midlands, and then motivating and leading our teams to deliver that.
I mean, it's quite unusual to have co-CEO, right?
It is. It's very unusual in museums.
Yeah.
It's, it's not unheard of. It's quite unusual in general, co-CEOs, because job sharing is often seen as something that shouldn't be done by people at the very top of organisations or in really senior roles.
Yeah.
But flexible working is, it's a progressive part of working life, and it makes, workplaces more inclusive. And so, things are changing, people are catching up, people are becoming more progressive and open-minded.
Yeah.
And the Board of Trustees at the Museum Service, when we popped along and said, we're a bit different, we're not your usual, museum directors, and part of that is we want to do this together, collaboratively. And they were open to that. Not all boards of trustees would be, but they were into it.
Can you talk about that journey from how you ended up deciding to be co-CEO sort of together and making that happen?
Yeah. So part of it is personal preference, for the two of us as individuals. That's what we wanted in our lives. But more broadly, I suppose, there is a political dimension to it, which is that museums are quite an elitist industry, and museum directors are, they're essentially, for whatever I, was saying about museum directorship evolving and becoming more modern, it's still a bastion of establishment. It's still an elite role, a powerful role, essentially. And so, as typical of other parts of the establishment, it's too white, it's too middle class, it's elitist and rarefied. There aren't enough people of colour, working class people. It's not a diverse enough picture.
Yeah.
So Zach and I are amongst the very, very, very few people of colour leading museums in this country. And that's structural. There's a structural inequality.
Yeah.
So, we we wanted to also do that job share role to show that actually it's up to us and our generation who are coming through now as directors to find a different model, set something up in a way that says to people who might see a job like that as not for them, and say, actually, Zach, for instance, has 2 small children. He doesn't want to be chained to like the job for like 7 days a week, 24 hours.
Yeah.
He wants to have a life. He wants to, do a satisfying, important, meaningful, purposeful job. But he also wants to see his children grow up and be an active father. Similarly, I have, things that I do outside the role related. But, a lot of people are like that. People with caring responsibilities, people with all sorts of reasons why they might look at big jobs and go, nah. And so part of what we were doing was saying, actually, we have a radical vision for this museum service. We need to jump this whole thing forward about 100 years. And seeing as there are actually at this time no other people in the what's called the National Museum Directors Committee who are people of colour, let's get 2. Let's get 2, and let's also get the fact that it's quite complex, running a complex organisation, which is, draws on huge amounts of types of knowledge that you need. It's very rare to find one person who's going to be amazing at all of that.
I was thinking that when you said about the sort of artistic direction of the Museum Trust, having somebody else to bounce ideas off of and share those kind of, finding common ground between 2 people must be really nice. I bet.
Now, obviously, this is your second time working for the Birmingham Museum Trust. After working as head of engagement at the Museum of London for a few years, how did you come about of coming from the London to over to Birmingham? Was that a choice or...?
No, I was frog marched up here by the Arts Council. So no more job to do, levelling up agenda. No, I mean, basically, I was one of those people working in culture who'd barely been out of London.
Right,
By the age of about 40. I was born in Pakistan, Rawalpindi. I was raised in sort of Essex, northeast London, and lived there most of my life, and lived and worked in London most of my life. And then,
Shut up.
Yes. You'd be shocked to hear.
Shut up.
And then in 2016 or so, there was a programme, a leadership development programme, run by the Arts Council to promote and develop people of colour and disabled people into leadership roles in the arts. And there was space for 20 people on this programme. And what it meant was you could leave where you worked and go for a year somewhere else and work there in a basically a tailor-made role, and you would be a change maker in that institution. So I was really lucky. I got on that programme. And at the time, I sort of assumed, I'll probably end up at some other London institution. And then one of the places on the list was Birmingham. And I was like, I don't really know it. I literally barely sort of know my way around out of the station. And so I came up 2016 for a chat. And even on the way to the museum, I fell in love with the city. I was just mouth open. Look at this mix of people. Look at the way these young people walk around this city and own it. It was like my multicultural dream come true. And even though I'd lived in London and grown up in an incredibly cosmopolitan place, it is different.
Yeah, it is.
It is very special. And by the time I got to the museum, I was like, right, I've really got to make these people like me because I need to come here. This is really feeling this. And luckily, I got on the programme and the museum people were like, yeah, you seem like our kind of person and you come. So I had this incredible year there and worked on a project basically an anti-racist project to rethink how the collections that relate to empire and the histories of empire were told in the museum. And as I spent this time in the museum, I was like, my God, these museum people are brilliant. I've known a lot of museum people, but these ones have this really, right through them, like a stick of rock kind of democratic impulse. They kind of, they have this different sensibility. They have a more meritocratic approach. The way they work with audiences and communities is next level.
Okay.
And, another thing, which I know is maybe a bit of a funny thing to put out there, but I noticed that not only the Black and Asian people who worked at the museum, but also the white people who worked at the museum, they had a better sort of cultural literacy around cultural diversity.
And understanding.
A lot more, people, because of the way this city is and the way that people live and work, you couldn't be in a room and assume that those white people didn't have Asian children or mixed heritage partners or didn't live in a predominantly Asian area and things like that. So there was something there in that cocktail that was incredibly seductive for the kind of ambitions and mission that I was on around equalities and telling different stories and all of that. And so I was like, this and a blinding collection, like 1 million objects of incredible range and diversity and quality, you know, really sort of top-notch designated collections, a really pucker fine art collection, contemporary art collection, almost unrivaled in its diversity. And normally what you find in cultural organisations is that you have kind of one thing or the other. You either have the like radical, you know, impulses and the kind of grassroots energy and that, you know, that sort of lifeblood going through it, or you have the pucker cultural assets. And this place had both.
Okay.
I was like, I can do something here. So when the year came to an end, I was like, oh, the programme's over, had a brilliant experience, trot off back to London, do my thing at Museum of London. And then, amazingly, a few years later, the very brilliant 𝗣𝗥𝗢𝗨𝗗, who was the director when I was at the museum, was retiring. And I was like, oh my God, it's
for me.
Could I actually go for that amazing organisation and run it? And then Zach wanted to do it together, and so that's where we are.
And you came in the middle of a pandemic to do that, right?
That's right.
That must have been quite strange in where most of the sites aren't allowed to be open. It must have been quite strange to come and just try and dive in without them actually being accessible.
Yeah, that's right, because without the public, you know, that's who you are open for. That's what makes it not just another office job. You know, you could be at your desk, but then you could go into the galleries and watch a group of school children, you know, having a laugh, or, you know,
it's
making
purpose.
some amazing discovery.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so without those people and that kind of constant energy, it's quite a different proposition. Luckily for Zach and I, we both come from a kind of leadership approach or style, you could say, that is all about change and transformation. So actually, if you are in the nicest possible way in the business of trying to tear something down and build it up again, in some ways a massive pause when everybody's forced to put down their tools and step back and go, actually, are we really achieving what we said we wanted to? Are we really serving the people of Birmingham the way we need to be? Is in some ways quite a positive, advantageous context. And also the way that we've had to live in these last few years really forces you to, you know...
even just think.
Exactly.
And stop and just slow down.
You must have found it in your lives and works and families, and that you have to double down on those first principles. You know, what kind of society do we want to live in? And if you're trying to reimagine a cultural organisation, I think a lot of people have felt that in this time, that's this sort of sobering reflection is, you know, it's a very valuable chance.
Yeah.
Sometimes I sit back and think, what if this had never happened to all of us in our lives? You know, the next half of my life is going to be post-pandemic, I hope, you know, we all hope. And I hope, you know, being in the business of history, it's all about the long view, the long game. So taking that, you know, opportunity to step back and really feel that we are living through a momentous shift in society and history in our sort of in what we think of a civilization is pretty special. So there were some upsides.
Yeah, of course.
I can clearly see like representation is something that you're really, really passionate about. Can you tell me a little bit about the two initiatives, Space Invaders and Museum Detox?
Yeah, that's a gift of a question. Thank you for asking me about those things. You can see me break it out into a big grin here. It's funny, actually. It's Monday today. Friday, we had our first Museum Detox social meetup, proper big one, in 2 years. So because of the pandemic and all of that, this group, the Museum Detox, which is a network of people of colour who work in museums, it's basically what it is. And we are now, there's about 600 people on this network and across Europe and the UK. But it all started, you know, about 7 years ago with a group of us in London. And so we would have these very regular, like 4 times a year, these big meetups where we literally just come together, go to a gallery or something, and then, you know, go to the pub. And we haven't been able to do that for 2 years, really. I was really fortunate to have one in Birmingham with the Birmingham chapter a few months back. But this one on Friday was at Tate Britain. We had the gallery to ourselves for the evening. They opened it just for us. And 50 of us went together to see Life Between Islands, which is the massive contemporary art show about the Caribbean, basically. And you just, if you'd seen the looks on everybody's faces, people come from York, from Coventry, from all over the country, come together. And a lot of these people hadn't seen each other in 2 years. These people have changed, like some of us have become museum directors in that time, some people have become trustees, some people have had children, all sorts of things have happened in people's lives, and we've been a community for these years. It's a very special community. A lot of the issues around decolonising, repatriation, restitution, just anti-racism, just all of those things, they're complex things for people in this line of work to wrestle with. Sometimes you have to, you feel like you're in between your employers and your community.
Yeah.
And you're sort of doing wrong by everybody. At other times, it's magic and amazing and you love it. Sometimes you're the only person of colour in the room for, or the whole institution, if you work in a smallish place. So this community of people, we've been supporting each other, cheering each other on, kind of Zach and I know each other through that network. So when we all got together again on Friday night after 2 years, it was so special and emotional, and to be surrounded by this incredible artwork, these kind of juicy images representing the warmth, the heat of the Caribbean, and this fine work all over the galleries, being hosted and invited in by one of our collective who works at Tate, and he's so proud in that moment. He's worked there 30 years. When he first started working there, people mistook him for the security guard or the cleaner, wouldn't let him in the door, that sort of shit, And now here he is 30 years later. The whole gallery is open just for him and his people. You're welcome to sit in on a Friday night, and it's how it should be.
That's awesome.
So if I just want to talk about, because you've got me onto museums now, so kind of like, for someone that's not necessarily interested in going to a museum, what would you say to them to persuade them to actually be in that space? Because art is such a beautiful thing. I know there's images, sculptures, all kinds of things from different cultures that you would see in those kind of spaces. What would you say to someone to enable them to actually go to the museum and check it out for the first time?
That's an excellent question. I shall go back and ask that of my team tomorrow morning, actually. I think what I would say is, if you think of it more like shops, like you go in a clothes shop and you don't want to buy everything in that clothes shop.
True.
A lot of it's not even aimed at you. It's not relevant to you, but you might go in there and find something pretty special that makes you feel a little bit zhuzh. And then you've got your new T-shirt, your new top, and you leave with a spring in your step and you wear that T-shirt and you feel good. Now, imagine if you think of like libraries or museums, much more like that. It's like for you to pick the thing that excites you.
Yeah.
But in there, all of that stuff is free and it all belongs to you, and you have absolutely all the right to go in there like you do just like in anywhere, in a shop. And they need you more than you need them. It's a new experience to go in somewhere and look and rifle through, instead of looking through, I don't know, where you might download your music from, or podcasts, or anything like that, or films, or Netflix. This is all this stuff you can rifle through and pick something, and something in there is going to amaze you. Someone you meet in there is going to tell you something amazing, and it's totally your choice. You can step away, and you're not obliged to like any of it, but I can promise you something somewhere is going to blow your mind. The thing is to take the power and say, it's not every clothes shop. Like, I know the trainers I like. I know the stuff I like. Narrow it down. Get into the thing that you like. Do you love fashion? There's a fashion museum. Do you love digital? There's a video game museum. Okay. Do you love football? There's a football museum. So I wouldn't expect everybody to like every book or every song. The same way with museums. You find one you like, and once you get into it, it's like walking through a portal, and there's a world to the other side.
That sounds amazing. I feel like even wanting to go to a museum.
Oh my gosh. What? Go to a museum? Right, if I could just get every punter in Birmingham, it'll only take 45 minutes, one by one, I'll get there eventually.
No, it's a lovely analogy of how to approach museums. Yeah, lovely. Space Invaders, fantastic name. Tell us about what Space Invaders is.
Space Invaders is a bit similar idea to Museum Detox. It's about basically gender equity and museums, history and culture. So although there's a lot of women working in museums, it's very different than people of colour, which is less than 3% of the entire museum workforce.
Wow.
Museums are majority populated and staffed by women. But gender representation is poor. If you go in most museums, it's still histories of great white men on the walls. Women's history is very underrepresented. And if you look at the top national museums, it's still overwhelmingly and predominantly tall white men running them. If you look at all the chairs of museums around the country, the governance, that's men. It's male-dominated at the top echelons, basically, and the worker bees are the women.
Right.
So because of that, there's basically a lot of sexism is perpetuated through these pretty important cultural institutions. So Space Invaders is a group of us, women who count ourselves feminists and activists, who basically are determined to use what access we have to these institutions to bring our feminist agenda to the forefront. So we want better representation in governance, we want fairer wages and terms for people working in museums, and we want, did I say, better stories, better representation, stories, better history, better governance and better terms. Yeah. So basically it's our way of doing what we call, in our sector, we call it museum activism. Yeah. And it's basically us, we're a bunch of feminists, and we call ourselves Space Invaders because we were inspired by a sociologist, feminist scholar called 𝗣𝗥𝗢𝗨𝗗, who is a sociologist at Goldsmiths and a dear friend, and she's based in Coventry actually, and she wrote a book called Space Invaders. It's titled because it's about women who are in spaces that you don't normally find them in. So like she did a study of women MPs in Westminster, I think another one was judges, and she described these people as space invaders because they're literally being in these unusual spaces. Yeah. And so women museum leaders are another, we are another group of space invaders.
That's awesome.
So talk us through, the different sites and any of your personal favourites, because you're covering quite a lot, aren't you?
Yeah. There's a lot of sites in the trust, that's right. It is the biggest museum trust in the country. So there's 8 venues that people will know of, and there's actually a 9th that we think of as a venue, but maybe the public don't kind of see it because it's a bit invisible. Mm-hmm. So although I love, Sarehole Mill and Aston Hall and, particularly the Museum of the Jewellery Quarter, and there's a lot to be enjoyed in all of those sites, my personal kind of place that I think is really inspiring and intriguing is the Museum Collection Centre in Nechells. So This is the warehouse where the million objects that most people have never seen are stored. On those racks is not like, flat packs of bookshelves and shit. It's like an amazing monstrous crab or an incredible old-fashioned bicycle or a stuffed weird eagle next to like an incredible bronze statue next to a work of art, next to a
sounds like you're describing a dream I've had or something.
Fat fryer. Yeah, it is. I mean, it still delights me every time I see it because I just think this is so mad and weird and incredible.
Wow. And it must be quite an exciting time at the moment because I know, as we mentioned earlier, you came into this role when a lot of places weren't able to be open, and things are opening up.
Yes.
Things are changing.
Yes.
So can you talk to us a little bit about that, what we can keep an eye on, what listeners can get involved with maybe?
The 28th of April is a date that you must not forget.
Okay.
And I must not forget to say it. I'm saying it. I'm going to say it again. The 28th of April, because that's when Birmingham Museum Art Gallery is going to reopen.
Right.
And it will have been closed a very long time then because we've been closed for rewiring, and then of course we closed even earlier because of the pandemic.
Yeah.
So it hasn't been open since 2020. And that's massive.
Yeah.
I talk to people about, I see people sometimes in the street and they're just like, when's the Museum Art Gallery opening again? I feel so sad.
Yeah.
I go there for my happy place. It's my, I just wander around on my own, or I meet my mates there, and it's such an absence, particularly for the whole city. It's, it is an amazing art gallery. So We're going to reopen it for the Commonwealth Games. It wasn't in our schedule, as it were, because the rewiring's going on for another couple of years. So we can only open a section of it, but that section is going to blow your mind.
Okay.
I don't know if you know the Industrial Gallery and the Round Room.
A little, like I've been there.
Well, if you sort of looked up museum in an encyclopedia,
Yeah.
that would be the picture of what a museum looked like. It's the Industrial Gallery, august Victorian,
That's the one with
double
the
vaulted ceiling.
statue in the middle.
And in
is
the
it?
Round Room, there's an incredible
Okay, yeah.
artwork, statue, sculpture in the middle, which is,
Yeah.
sort of iconic and what people know the Round Room for.
It's unbelievable, yeah.
There's also a massive traditional hang of artwork, salon hangs, we call it, like from the floor to the ceiling, of basically, masterpieces and what would look from a distance to, many people as very traditional looking artworks in brass frames and big, heavy, thick, dark red paint, and it's all very like... that's an official museum term.
Right.
Yeah. And so, the Industrial Gallery's got stained glass window and some collections and displays which haven't been changed in a long time, shall we say. So that's what people are used to. But when they go back in the museum, that's all gone.
Wow.
We've taken it all down. We've had to remove 36,000 items from the museum collection store because of the rewiring. So a large part of the museum will still be blocked off. But the Industrial Gallery, the bridge, the Round Room, the Edwardian tea rooms, all of that will be open, and it's been transformed because we've been working with a group of young people, a group of guest curators like the music historian Jez Collins, and with Flat Pack Festival, who look at the history of cinema. We've been working with Collaboration and Mukhtar Dar, who's telling the story of the anti-racist movement and his own part in that. So all of these spaces have been transformed. And
quite different, eh?
Very different,
yeah.
Very different. So you're going to see a completely different version of the Museum Art Gallery in miniature, and we're going to open, and then we need to close again. So it's a kind of limited time.
So is this for the Commonwealth Games you're open?
Exactly. We're going to open
great.
from the 28th of April, and then we're going to close again later in the year, not to open for at least another year and a half after that.
Yeah.
So this is a window to get in
there
and enjoy it. And then the other thing that's going to open is a temporary exhibition by the Turner Prize winning artist 𝗣𝗥𝗢𝗨𝗗, who is an incredible artist who's been recognised, now recently with the Turner Prize. And that exhibition is going to open on the 14th of May. It's called Found Cities, Lost Objects, Women in the City. And again, we're breaking with tradition. Normally we charge for the exhibitions in the gas hall, the temporary exhibitions of quite often, very significant and kind of major contemporary artworks. But this time we're saying to people, just pay what you can. You tell us what you think it's worth, and then we'll go from there.
Wow.
Sounds amazing.
Yeah, exciting times. I'm really thrilled that it's opening for the Commonwealth Games as well. There's going to be a lot of people coming through.
Yeah, we can't wait to be part of that.
Yeah, it's
2
awesome.
dates for our diary, Ben.
Indeed, yeah.
Indeed. So on our episodes, we ask all of our guests this same question. You've even mentioned the word bold, literally, a few seconds ago. What makes Birmingham bold for you?
Being in the business of history, I have to take the long view and say that what makes it bold is that there is a radical tradition in Birmingham. There is a tradition of radical thought, independent thought. I mentioned before that this was the first place that has civic university. It's not a place of groupthink historically, and that's to do with how the city was formed, that it was formed of sort of independent guilds, smaller businesses, people migrating from other places. It's not a place in a kind of unified, homogenous way that everybody votes the same way or everybody thinks this way. It's a place of independent thinkers and more sort of underground movements. So you'll see that in things like even the music culture, music scene, even like the 20th century one. You'll see how there are different movements and great venues, much more that independent kind of quirky free thinkers, a bit like those lunar men that I was talking about before, the new ideas, the slightly kind of unbound, untrammeled energy. And there's something rough around the edges, obviously, with the industrial heritage here that is willfully unpolished. So I think there is something in the spirit of this place, deep in the roots of this place, that make it bold and make it a good place for innovation and bold thinkers and bold creatives. Yeah.
Great answer.
It was such a great answer. Thank you so much for joining
Sara,
us.
You've been fantastic.
Oh,
Brilliant.
Run over time, sorry, and thank you for letting me run and run.
It's been
ramble on.
great.
I remember what you said at the beginning about waffle. I can well imagine there's some big chunks to come out from there. But thanks very much for having me.
You've shared loads and it's been absolutely fantastic. Thanks, Sara.
And I definitely feel like I'm going to be booking in 2 dates into the museum.
Absolutely,
That's
yeah.
a date, Ben.
Absolutely, yeah, let's do it.
Thank you so much for joining us here on the
Not at all.
podcast.
Thank you for
You
having
can access all of our episodes on the Birmingham City Council YouTube, Spotify, Apple. Tell your mom, tell your dad, tell everybody, because we've got more episodes coming your way. But bye for now.
See ya.